Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are presenting the communique that was issued at the end of the virtual National Executive Council meeting of the Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors that held at Gombe International Hotel in Gombe State from 20th July to 25th of July 2020. The Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors held her National Executive Council meeting with the theme Targeted Violence Against Healthcare Workers in Nigeria's Healthcare Facilities, Effects on Healthcare Service Delivery. This event held virtually from 20th of July to 25th of July 2020. The chairman of the occasion was Dr. Abubakar Ali Gombe, the former Minister of State for Health. Special guest of honor was His Excellency Alhaji Muhammad Inwa Yahaya, the Executive Governor of Gombe State. The Royal Father was His Royal Highness Abubakar Shehu Abubakar III, the Emir of Gombe. Guest of honor was Right Honorable Abubakar Ibrahim, the Speaker of Gombe State House of Assembly. The chief host was Dr. Sule Batna, the Chief Medical Director of Federal Teaching Hospital, Gombe State. The doctors held several activities that included the Doctors Reach Out program, which was conducted at the Medium Security Nigerian Correctional Service, Gombe State. The National Executive Council meeting proper was attended by over 200 members of the association across the country and deliberated extensively on the suspended Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors strike. The National Executive Council observed with dismay the continued administrative rascality and victimization of her members by the Chief Medical Director of University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital, and frowned at the undue suspension of resident doctors who also doubled as the legitimate executive council officers of the association. The National Executive Council demands that various hospitals be provided with the necessary infrastructure and sustain the provision of needed personal protective equipment and funding of various tertiary health institutions. The National Executive Council also observed that the medical residency training funding, though have been captured in the revised 2020 budget and signed by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria into law, the implementation of the funding is yet to commence. The National Executive Council also noted that the COVID hazard allowance payment was commenced and subsequently abandoned. Abruptly, immediately, the NAD strike was suspended. The National Executive Council also noted the initial intervention of the House Committee on Insurance to address the non-enrollment of resident doctors for the life insurance, which has now been abandoned, again following the suspension of NAD strike. The National Executive Council noted with dismay the non-payment of salary shortfall for 2014, 2015, and 2016, despite promises by several stakeholders to intervene, which led to the suspension of the strike 4 weeks ago. On the state tertiary health institution, the National Executive Council noted the non-implementation of the Medical Residency Training Act by some state governments, as well as the poor remuneration of state healthcare workers in those states. The National Executive Council observed the non-payment of arrears of consequential adjustment of new minimum wage to her members, It's worthy of note that this consequential adjustment has been paid to every single federal civil servant in the country except this group of doctors. Therefore, the National Executive Council meeting resolved as follows. 1. The immediate removal of the Chief Medical Director of University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital, Professor Henry Ogboma, for fraud, administrative rascality, unnecessary onslaught, victimization, and abuse of office. We also demand the immediate and unconditional reinstatement of those resident doctors, Executive Council that were suspended by this same Chief Medical Director for failing to be part of the fraud the CMD is involved in. The National Executive Council also resolved to demand that various hospitals be provided with the necessary funds they need to run their hospitals. It's important that we state here that all the federal teaching hospitals, none of them has been provided with any fund whatsoever since the outset of this COVID-19, except, of course, the fact that they have been provided with personal protective equipment and drugs. These hospitals need funds to run, and that explains why we have been having several issues with regards to the management of COVID-19 in the country. So we demand that the needed funds be made available to these hospitals so that the hospitals can function properly. The National Executive Council also demands the immediate implementation of the funding for the medical residency training as agreed. NAD demands the payment of COVID hazard allowance to her members, which is now long overdue. This payment was supposed to be for 6 months, and the government made some payments for just 2 months, and even the 2 months was abandoned halfway. Just immediately our strike was suspended. So we demand the payment of the full hazard allowance as agreed. National Executive Council also calls on the National Assembly to investigate and look into the non-enrollment of resident doctors for the group life insurance, as well as the non-payment of death in service benefits to the next of kin of our fallen heroes, despite claims of payments to insurance companies. The National Executive Council demands the immediate payment of the arrears of consequential adjustment of the minimum wage owed some of our members. The National Executive Council also calls on state governments to implement the Medical Residency Training Act and to ensure adequate remuneration of state healthcare workers. Finally, the National Executive Council, as you are aware, suspended the strike 4 weeks ago with the view that all these our demands will be addressed, which unfortunately has remained unattended to. The National Executive Council has also this time again resolved to extend this same suspension by another 3 weeks, failure of which we will have no choice than to resume the suspended strike on the 17th of August 2020. That's at the expiration of the 3 weeks extension.